Section 12.2, the independence of Texas. So we move on from Oregon country into the Lone Star State, the Lone Star Republic. So here we have that very iconic shape of the state of Texas. And so we'll just look at a few maps here. The flag of Texas, which is very identifiable, especially to people from Texas. So you can take a look here and see some of the locations of famous cities: Dallas, Fort Worth, El Paso in the west, Houston down towards the Gulf, and some of the other historical cities like San Antonio and Austin. So we're going to move on to the map that I had you working on that looked like this. So we're not going to show you everything, but pretty much what you should be doing is understanding that the states are basically, this would be Arkansas right here. Now some of us incorrectly stopped coloring at the river that cuts through there, but make sure you color all the way over here, and this would be the Mississippi River as it flows down and then out of the picture. So this state right here would be Louisiana. So we've done those two. Mexico would be on the other side of this feature, okay, which is another river, and that would be the Rio Grande, okay? And then you could color it up on this small other side as well. So that's Mexico. The areas that you were supposed to identify with any color would be north of this river right here, right where this line is. This is the Red River right there. So the Red River is right here, and so this area up and up to the top of the map and over in here, this is all Indian territory. The Republic of Texas would be south of the Red River, okay, coming all the way over here and then going right along this border here with the state of Louisiana. Coming down here, this is the river that was really difficult to find, which is the Nueces. The Nueces is this little part right here, and so everything east of this line and then attaching to the Nueces, this was the Republic of Texas. So that would mean disputed areas, that's Texas and Mexico. That would be this area right in here. So basically it should be, disputed areas, nice and big, and color this whole thing. So we've done all those rivers. The things that we haven't done is the two cities. So just give me a second here to bring this up. So this one would be the Alamo, okay, on the San Antonio River. And this would actually be San Jacinto, or the city of Houston today. So you can sort of see the actual city of Houston sits on the old battleground of the Battle of San Jacinto. The other rivers that we did mention there were, of course, the Nueces, okay, and the Red River. I don't think I threw in the Rio Grande. The Rio Grande provides that very iconic southern shape of the state of Texas. So we're going to just work our way through these questions. Why do people go to Texas in the early 1820s? And then you were supposed to find a picture that demonstrates that. And then let's do that one first. So Americans go there for a variety of reasons, but the biggest thing is they're getting large tracts of land at either free prices or very, very reduced prices for families to come into northern part of Mexico, of one of their provinces known as Tejas or Texas. So the people that were picked to organize these things by the Mexican government and were given large tracts of land that they could then subdivide were known as empresarios. And probably the most famous impresario would be the original one, which is Stephen Austin. He's in charge of recruiting families into the early parts and eastern parts of Texas. He inherited the claim from his father, Moses, who actually had received the claim but died of pneumonia before actually settling in Texas. The second question I ask is basically talks about, hey, what's the growing tension between Americans in Texas and the Mexican government? So the tensions that arise between the Americans and the Mexican government comes from a variety of reasons. So the first one is, quickly, American settlers actually outnumber the Mexicans who were born in Texas. They're known as Tejanos. So you had, let's say, a few thousand Tejanos, maybe 2,000 or 3,000, and you had maybe 20,000 Americans in a short period of time, less than about a decade. What also kind of started to lead to tensions between the two is that the Americans had not really followed those colonization laws that the Mexicans placed upon any new arrivals. And that was basically, hey, learn Spanish, obey laws, maybe become a Mexican citizen. And the big one was the idea of converting to Catholicism. Many new Texans just ignored any and all of these, and so that angered them, as well as, it's not listed here, is that they did bring slaves into Texas. Now, Texas was not a country that legalized slavery. It was not illegal at that point, but they did allow Americans to come in because they realized they would be bringing money into their country as well. Finally, some of the other things that the Mexican government did that really angered Texans was the idea that they basically closed the border. They stopped all immigration from the United States into the northern part of Mexico. So if you were around in the late 1820s and you were secretly crossing into Texas and starting to build a home, you were the illegal immigrant crossing into Mexico. And then what also angered them, the Texans, were that the Santa Anna, here he is, overthrows the legitimate constitution and pretty much becomes a dictator, all but in name. And so that really scared Texans, and also pushes them into the idea of perhaps rebelling and rejecting Mexico City and perhaps breaking away. So the Texan independence movement is very short-lived. The American one, of course, lasts 8 years. This one only lasts less than 1 year, about 9-10 months. So we're going to talk about the importance of Gonzales. Gonzales was that first battle in the Texan independence movement. And the question was, what saying comes from it? And it came from a detachment of Mexican cavalry who went into the town of Gonzales, and they were there to claim a cannon that they had actually left behind to allow the Texans to perhaps ward off Native American tribes. And then they were there to get it, and basically the Texans hung this sign that says, "Come and take it." So if we were in Texas, all of you would recognize that flag because it's flown very much as a symbol of Texan pride. And so in this little skirmish fight, the Texans are able to dispatch and disrupt the cavalry from coming into Gonzales to seize this cannon. So this is the first fight. It's sort of the Lexington and Concord of the Texan independence movement. The other question I have you respond to is probably the most iconic thing, and that is the idea of the Alamo. What happened at the Alamo? Why is it, remember the Alamo? It is the iconic and most visited site in all of Texas as far as part of their historical background. So if we take a look at the Alamo today, this is it. This is all that is left of the Alamo. And so most kids, and maybe even some adults, tend to think that this is where the Texan defenders actually sort of defended themselves against the Mexican army in this very structure. And the answer is no, that did not happen. This is all that is left of a large complex that was known as the Alamo. So let me just show you another view. So here's an artist rendering of what it would have looked like in the 1836 year when it happens. So it was a large complex that ran about 500 feet from this end to this end, and about 200 to 250 east-west. They had high walls. There was gates because this was a Spanish mission, but they did fear a little bit and be concerned about the outside threats, mostly from Native Americans. So missions were built all throughout the Spanish world, and this was just another Spanish mission. The only thing that we see today, folks, is this. This is the only part that's left. All the other stuff was actually either destroyed or torn down over the years. So in the days of the battle that lasts for 12 to 13 days, much of these walls were heavily destroyed by Mexican artillery. And that which was not eventually destroyed, as the town of San Antonio grew, they just realized as they wanted to move further and further, they just had to tear down this stuff. Luckily, they kept the old church, and that's the only thing that's in existence today. So it's just another image here to give you a color version of what it looked like. And you sort of see these ramps all throughout the actual fortification. And they had a few cannons, and they would just basically move them around from one area to the other as the Mexican army made various probing attacks over the 12 to 13 days. So that's what it really looked like at the time of the battle. So what happens at the Alamo? As I said, it's an abandoned Spanish mission, and as we also mentioned, Texans go inside and they barricade themselves inside the mission, and their job is to hold back the Mexican army, which is marching north to crush this Texan independence movement. Inside, the Texans are able to hold out against, some figures go as high as 4,000 or 5,000, some are as low as 2,000 to 3,000 Mexican soldiers for more than a fortnight, 12 days, 14 days. And so the point is, as they hold out, they are able to delay and allow the rest of Texas to basically prepare. But eventually they run low on ammunition, they run low on men, and they are overwhelmed finally on March 6th. Mexican troops come over the walls and basically breach the actual defenses, and they are in, and everyone inside is then massacred, excluding some women and slaves. But as the people who remember their sacrifice start the saying, "Remember the Alamo." So why should we remember it? Well, all the defenders are killed, so it's an inspiration to Texans. And it also, as I said, gave the rest of Texans who were coming to the aid of people like Sam Houston to come up with a defense and a way of defeating the Mexican army. So just some old drawings of what they would have said it looked like at the time. And yes, much of the church was actually, the top of it was blown away. So what you see today is actually built back after the battle. And don't ask me why, because I don't really know why they would do that. But this is the way it looks today. Perhaps they wanted a more finished, traditional, what we call Spanish arch. That's a very indicative of Spanish architecture, is this kind of symbol there. So some of the co-commanders and the dates here that we should have down is that William Travis is this very young man who is the actual commander of the Alamo, and he is helped by Jim Bowie, or the Bowie knife. He was famous for his knife that was about 2 to 3 inches in width and about 8 to 10 or more inches long. He was known to be a very adept knife fighter. But sadly, during the actual battle, he was sick, dying of tuberculosis. So he was actually killed in his bed. He was in the hospital, whatever, makeshift hospital. And the Mexicans found him there, and he was bayoneted there in the bed, and they thought he was a coward. But really, if he would not have died in the actual battle, he probably would have died within a week or two of tuberculosis. And probably the most famous person that went to the Alamo was Davy Crockett. Now, Davy Crockett, this is an actual painting of him. He was a frontiersman, he was a politician, he had been elected to Congress. In some ways, he was like an actor. He actually had put on productions in, I believe, New York and Philadelphia about him and the Lion of the West and all these other things. And so he is also in there with the rest of the defenders and his Tennessee boys. He had actually left Tennessee after he lost his chance at re-election. The funny story is a reporter asked him, "What do you have to say to the people who chose not to send you back to Congress?" And his quote was, "You can tell them to go to hell. I'm going to Texas." So it gives you kind of an idea of who the person was of Davy Crockett. More imagery from perhaps some artists of the last day of the Battle of the Alamo. These, of course, would be Texans. Perhaps this is Travis up there on the wall. These were Mexican soldiers with ladders because they have to breach the defenses. And so this is what you would have perhaps seen if you were there at the Alamo. This is a very iconic picture. I believe it's in your book. In the background, you can sort of see the church. And this would be Davy Crockett on March 6th. These are Mexican troops coming in, and the battle was very pitched and very close. Some people believe actually Davy Crockett and a few of the defenders actually surrendered and then were executed and massacred. All of the defenders' bodies were dragged into the middle of the courtyard and burned. And so Santa Anna thought that kind of action would really scare the rest of Texans and make them kind of cower in fear, and it did not. It actually just caused more resentment and more steadfastness to having their own independent. So the last questions here are, what's the importance of the Battle of San Jacinto? And then why does Texas not join the United States immediately? They're actually their own independent country for 9 years. So the Battle of San Jacinto is the opposite of Gonzales. It is the last battle in the Texan independence movement, and it occurs about 5 or 6 weeks after the Battle of the Alamo. And so the Texans are able to win this battle, even though they're actually outnumbered. I'll put some facts up here. So their leader is Sam Houston. That's where we get the name of the city. And he is commanding about 800 Texans versus about 1,500 Mexican troops under Santa Anna. And Santa Anna thinks he's going to be able to crush this independence movement, but Sam Houston is able to wait and bide his time to adjust to perhaps the most advantageous spot and launches a kind of a secret attack against the Mexican forces. It is interesting that most of it happens within 20 minutes. And most of the Mexican army is either killed, captured, or wounded in that short period of time. And so more than people being wounded and killed, they actually are able to capture Santa Anna after the battle. So many of these prisoners are disarmed and then just basically kicked out of the Republic of Texas. They had surrendered and they were going back to Mexico City. Santa Anna wanted to hide among his own soldiers. He's not dressed like this with all the fanciness. He basically ditched this uniform and picked up a soldier's uniform and tried to make his way with the retreating soldiers. But they all recognized him, and they all kind of started coming over and saying El Presidente and shaking his hand and saluting, and it got the attention of the Texans, and they realized, hey, this is a pretty important guy. And it turns out he is the guy. And so due to his capture, you have this scene that occurs the next day where Santa Anna is brought before Sam Houston. You can sort of see Santa Anna's here in the white pants, and he is forced to sign a document that basically allows Texas to be its own independent republic. So this is Sam Houston. So with that is the end of the Texan independence movement. So the Mexican army is dispatched out of the Republic of Texas. Santa Anna returns back to Mexico. And then you have the Texans select their first president. And of course, that would be good old Sam Houston. So here he is with a painting. And then this is him photographed years later. So yes, he is in the age of photography. Wrapping things up, why does Texas not join the United States? Well, the real answer is basically slavery. Just like many of our parts and our faults in our nation's history, it goes back to slavery. So Northerners and Southerners are split on admitting it. Various presidents, meaning you're talking about Martin Van Buren, you're talking about, well, Harrison wasn't around for long, you're talking about John Tyler. They were just upset about the idea of upsetting the balance between slave and free states. But eventually, you remember that idea of manifest destiny is sweeping the nation, and we have to basically reach the West Coast, and we want to expand. And so eventually, in 1845, you have it being annexed, meaning taken in, at the very end of John Tyler's administration in 1845. It becomes the 28th state in the United States. Thus ends the idea of the independence of Texas.